Hey, everybody. Welcome to our final January Jumpstart event. We've got another one here with our founder at Maven Analytics, Chris Dutton. And today, he and I are going to tag team any and all questions that you guys have about the data interview process. So if you could use the questions tab, that's the best place to fire questions. And we've also got a bunch of pre-submitted questions that we'll jump right into for you. So with that said, Chris, if you've got anything else you want to give for background, go for it. And if not, we can kind of start jumping in for folks.
Yeah, no extra background. Just love seeing the chat here. Every time I just like dialing in and seeing who's calling from where. So I think the award might go to Alexandre from Thailand. It's 3 a.m. there. So that is amazing commitment. Thank you for staying up late or getting up early, whichever it is, to join us. We really appreciate it. We've got some Aussies, we've got Canada, Italy, Nigeria. Pretty amazing to see. So that's fantastic. And just to reiterate what John said, I know some people pre-submitted questions. We've got those pulled up, and John and I will kind of trade off and tag team. If there are other questions that come to mind or anything that you're just dying to get an answer, it's burning, drop it in the question forum here in Livestorm as well, and we'll be checking both spots. So I'll go ahead and kick it off and just start pulling some questions out of this list. First question that I'll handle is how to sound confident talking about and describing projects. So we often talk about project portfolios being just an absolutely amazing tool and asset for you to use as a prospective candidate or analyst to showcase what you're capable of instead of just describing it through words on a resume. I think when it comes time to talking through a project with confidence, it can be really helpful to prep and to design your project in a way that kind of forces you to describe the business case. What was the context? How did you tackle the problem? What was your strategy to building this project? What insights did you find? That description is a really important part of a project portfolio in itself. So when we talk about a portfolio, we're not just talking about a gallery of images, for instance, right? If I'm looking at a candidate's portfolio, I want to understand how they thought about solving the problem, what tools and skills and techniques they used to apply to that project. And so as you're building your projects and hopefully including that context and that background, that should give you a really helpful talk track to help you describe that project with confidence. If you don't have that background, that context, it can be much harder to do that. So if you haven't already, I would highly recommend loading some projects up on Maven Showcase. And we've kind of tailor-made that platform for data professionals to force you to think through how you solve the problem, to write a description and an excerpt. And that can really help just capture your thoughts around your project.
So I'll take one from the pre-submitted questions. This one's from Kalen Tobin, and it says, in terms of technical questions, for example, writing SQL queries that answer a given question, if you are stumped and realize it's because of a gap in knowledge, how would you best approach that? So that's a really good one. I think Chris and I talked in the last session about like sort of never bluffing. And I would just own that gap. What I would try to do in that given situation is, talk through the parts that you do understand and you can do to be able to showcase that knowledge. Don't just say, oh, I don't know how to do it. But I would say, okay, I'm able to do this part up to here. I actually would need to go and do a little research to figure out this next part, but I could do that. So that's how personally I would own it, confidently say, I don't know how to do that specific thing, but I can do some other things and I can figure it out. And I have, actually, I was interviewing at a company called Vistaprint, and at Vistaprint, the analytics group, basically it was like, out of a 40-hour week, it was like 38 hours of writing SQL code. It's actually where I got good at writing SQL queries. And at the time when I came in, I really didn't know SQL. And it was 4 hours of interviews, 4 different people. And one of them was just an advanced SQL grilling exercise. Like they put some tables on a board. They said, hey, write all these queries. And at the very beginning of the interview, I said to the guy, I said, well, I don't really know. I don't know SQL. And he kind of looked at me like, well, what are you doing here? That's the job. Like, how did you get this far that you made it past our screeners? And I said, I've been using Excel as my databases, and like I solved this similar problem, and I can explain how I would do it. And I would use this as the key, and I would use a VLOOKUP, and then I would sum this, and I would apply this logical condition. And so I sort of wrote this like pseudo code for him. And I don't know if he voted against me or not, but I did get the job. And then I eventually learned SQL. So I think that might be a good concrete example of sort of, tell them that even if you can't completely do the thing that they want you to do, show them what you can do, get as close as possible, and, make them confident that you feel confident that you could figure it out.
Awesome. I've got another project specific question that I'll cover. So the question is, what are the best projects to showcase at interviews for a data analyst job? I think it kind of depends. Ideally, if you have a project that aligns with the industry or the vertical or the type of business that you're interviewing for, that is like the gold standard, right? Even if it's sample data, even if you grabbed it from the data playground or Kaggle or somewhere else, being able to say, hey, I'm applying for this supply chain analyst role. And by the way, here's a project that I worked on to analyze supply chain data. That is absolutely the best way to go. If you don't have a project that aligns perfectly with the job in that way, I would say try to showcase your versatility in your portfolio so that it's not just 10 of the same projects that look exactly the same, that use exactly the same tools. Try to showcase a little bit of diversity there. And then any projects that can really show off how well you're able to apply a range of analytical skills. So a project that maybe requires a little bit of data cleaning and data prep, maybe some relational data modeling or database analytics, some visuals, some data storytelling or dashboard design. The more you can show off your breadth and your ability to kind of nail every stage of the analytics workflow, projects like that are amazing too. So really just put yourself in the shoes of someone who's a complete stranger and say, hey, how is my portfolio representing me as an analyst? And make sure it paints a good picture as a talented, well-rounded professional.
Awesome. I'll take one of these that were submitted in session here. This one's from Georgie. So when it comes to case study, estimating marketing campaign performance, what suggestions would you make before or during this type of case study? So Georgie, first thing I would do is kind of just become familiar with the broad brushstrokes of a marketing campaign. So basically, some kind of a marketing campaign, you're going to be spending some money and you're going to be trying to sell some product or service, right? So those are kind of the two ends of your analysis. And then for the spend that you have out there, you're going to have some kind of a creative that you're putting out into market, and that might be search ads, or it might be display ads, or it could be videos that you're running on TikTok. Today is a huge channel, right? So you're running a whole bunch of different creatives. You're going to have some kind of targeting mechanism in your marketing campaign, and that could be as simple as like, we're going to go after everybody on Facebook. It could be more narrow than that, and you could say we're going to go after people on Facebook between 25 and 35 that are female, because that's our sweet spot, right? So that's an example of targeting criteria. So you're thinking about who specifically you're going after, and that could be demographics, geographics. It could be they're interested in certain things, they follow some page, they search a certain keyword on Google. So like all those different ways that you might decide to serve an ad to one person but not serve an ad to someone else. So that's, you want to be thinking about the different targeting. You want to be thinking about the different creatives, and then you want to be thinking about sort of the response rate to that those ads. So of the people that you show you're going to expect some percentage of them to click on the ad or to go to your website, right? And then of the people that get to your website, some percentage of them are going to purchase your product or service. So basically, if you're asking for advice before then, I would make sure you kind of like draw this all out and think about sort of just that framework. And then think about how you would talk about that in an interview, like how you're going to measure the targeting criteria, how you're going to measure the creatives, how you're going to analyze the conversion rate of your website and look for opportunities. And somebody talking about those things as an analyst, that would be the person that I would think did a good job on this case study. And I've done a case study exactly like this many times as an interviewer, actually, trying to see if analysts would be good for a marketing analyst role. So it's absolutely something that will come up if you're trying to do a marketing analyst role. Hope that helps.
Awesome. I'm seeing a few related comments and a question that was pre-submitted as well that are all kind of related to answering a question about a tool or skill that you haven't used before. John kind of touched on this one. I think there are some really good comments in the chat from Kevin, who says, as someone who hires a lot in his current job, he really cares if someone has the answer, but more interested in whether or not they would own it and then tell me how they would find the answer. I think that's great advice. Number one, don't bluff, like John said, right? It's not about pretending like you do know it because that's the answer you want or you expect that the interviewer wants to hear. Own it. Talk about how you would go about developing those skills. And if you can draw parallels to tools or skills that you do have, that would be a great place to dig into that a bit. So if someone says, hey, Chris, like, how would you do this in Tableau? I rarely use Tableau. I'm probably a 1 out of 10, but I use Power BI a ton, and they are both self-service BI platforms that do a lot of the same things. So I might say, you know what, I haven't dug really deep into Tableau. I've been primarily focused with Power BI in previous roles. But here's how I would approach in Power BI. I'd design my relational model this way. I would use data prep techniques like this to QA. And like, now you're talking about universal skills that everyone cares about, right? And if I can speak confidently about my skills, hopefully the interviewer would be able to say, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. I'm not worried about him applying those skills using a different tool like Tableau, right? So I think those would be my two pieces of advice. Be honest about it and try to draw parallels and tie it back to the underlying skills that you do have.
Awesome. Caroline's got a great question here. How long and detailed should a case study be if a hiring manager gets an impression of a resume within 6 seconds? So I love that you were part of that session or saw our course. How much time would they spend on a case study? So that depends on the specific question being posed in the case study. But in my experience, there's going to be some like pretty quick questions that you can answer in a couple of minutes. And there's others that are like more of an exploratory. So for example, Chris talked a little bit about a root cause analysis type of a question. That's one that I would say is often on the longer side because it's letting the candidate become a detective and starting to dig into the data. And so I'll give you guys an example of that I would often do when hiring analysts. I would say, hey, we have this website. Here's where we get our traffic from in general, and then we sell this product on the website, right? And I draw them a little diagram, or it might be on a sheet at the start of the interview. And I say, the CEO has come to me. Everybody else at the company is at a conference. I'm the only person there. And he said, oh my gosh, revenue is down 40% this week. I need your help figuring this out. And basically that's the prompt. And then I say, okay, what would you do to start diving into that? That's an example of a case study that takes a little bit longer because they're going to be asking questions. They're going to be probing and saying, well, can I get access to this data? Can I get website traffic? Can I get conversion rates? Can I look at it by device type? Like, they're going to be starting to ask all these questions. And and depending how hard you want to make it as the interviewer, you can kind of shut some of those avenues off and say, oh no, that's not available, that's not available. But it really, the goal there is to get inside their head and see how they dive into this problem and eventually get to some answer. But the answer doesn't matter. Like Kevin was saying, it's really about the process to get there and how they think. And also the other thing about case studies is it's about how it feels to work with the person. To me, I've always felt like the case study interviews, to me, that's the best indicator that I should hire somebody or not. Because if you go through a problem like that, that's analytical and has some business there too, and at the end of it, as an interviewer, you feel like, wow, that was really fun solving this with the person. That's like the work you're going to be doing in an analytics department day to day. And that's so I don't know that I've ever hired somebody when I'm like, man, that was bad. That was a bad hour, on a case study. And I've definitely had people that it's been a really, really strong thing. So, but anyway, that's a way long-winded answer to, it's probably between 5 minutes if it's like a super short question to even up to a whole hour we've sometimes allocated for them. So hope that helps.
Nice. Here's another good one. So how do I sound more confident and communicate passion for the job when I don't have a lot of data analyst experience? Really good question. And this is about convincing the employer to kind of take a shot on you, right? As someone who's new to this industry. I think there are a couple ways that I've seen people do this quite well. One is through projects and passion projects. If you don't have real world work experience to showcase or draw from as part of your interview, what you can do is say, you know what, I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm a huge World Cup fan, whatever it might be. Go find a data set, explore it, analyze it, build some visuals, use that as portfolio projects. What I love about that is it shows that passion in a really tangible way. And it tells me as a hiring manager or an employer that you're really interested in this field so much that you are willing to go find interesting data sets, go through this process of exploring and analyzing it and showcasing your work. I think that is a really powerful thing to show. The other way you can do this is, even if your prior work experience doesn't involve a data specific role, if you've been able to find ways to leverage data to do your job better or more efficiently or find new opportunities, maybe you're an HR rep, right? And you got your hands on some employee survey data and did your own analysis to uncover an interesting insight or finding. Like, any anecdotes like that you can share, and in an interview say, you know what, I never held a professional analytics specialist position, but I love finding ways to use data to do my job better, and I want to do this full time. Like, that's how you sell yourself and convince an employer that you're cut out for a career in analytics long term. So I think any parallels that you can draw with work experience that you do have, even if it's not in a data specific role, and any passion projects that you can put together to really capture how interested you are, both of those are great ways to show that confidence and communicate that passion in an interview.
That's awesome, Chris. I'll take one here. It's just actually from the chat, Abhilasha. And Abhilasha, I think you've been on maybe every session, so that's fantastic. By the way, anybody, if you've been in every session, give us a little love in the chat. I think there's a couple of you that but we haven't been tracking perfectly. So Abhilasha is saying you've got end-to-end projects like we've discussed. Basically, should we have some projects that are strictly focused on data cleaning for each tool, like with Power Query or with SQL, or does doing that alone reflect the skills strongly? Not a lot of portfolios are really focused that way. So what do you think? So here's my take, and it maybe sounds surprising, but I would not recommend doing that like just a data cleansing exercise without anything else. And what I think, so here's the interesting thing. Cleaning data is probably one of those things that separates like a very entry-level person from somebody who kind of knows their stuff, right? Like the super entry-level person might take a data set that has all these problems and just start diving into it and give some recommendations and but they haven't fixed the problems, the caveats, right? And then the next level person knows to do that. They do that very unsexy work of cleaning the data, and it gets them a much better analysis, right? Because they've gone through, and that's the real pros always dig in and do that. But showing a project that's just about that, and you're just exclusively about data cleansing, is so boring, and I think you lose a lot of people, and that's one of the things. So what I would recommend is first explain the business problem, then explain here's the insights and the recommendations, and then hit them with the detailed, like, here was my data cleaning process. This was a crazy data set. There was all these nulls. There were values that absolutely didn't make any sense. And here's how I cleaned them so I could get a really robust analysis. And if, at that point, you could even say something like, here's what the analysis would have looked like if I didn't take these out, and kind of do it both ways. And that would look really cool. But I think you got to pique their interest first with the business problem, the insights and the recommendations, and then hit them with the technical. It's the same thing I tell people when they say, should I present projects that are like SQL code or Python code? Like, you're going to lose people right off the bat. So hit them with that awesome technical muscle at the end of the project, and that's when you'll be an absolute stunner. So hope that helps, Ablasha.
Awesome. I'll take one from the question form here. So, good question. Can you share tips of interview expected for HR data analysts and the kind of project one should showcase? I'm going to answer in a little bit more of a general way, not just for HR, but for anyone who has a similar question, preparing for an interview in any kind of specialty area like this. I would say use your resources, use Google, use ChatGPT, ask what are the most common cases and problems that HR data analysts solve. And that's going to give you a pretty good list of representative projects that you might expect to encounter in that role. I've never been an HR analyst, so I couldn't tell you the answer. I have some ideas and some thoughts, but that would be the very first thing that I would do. Get that list just so you start to understand what does a day in the life look like for this type of professional. And then, like I said before, you can find data sets that map to those types of projects for free anywhere, and then try to build projects that align with those most common types of tasks. Speaking of HR specifically, we actually do have an HR survey analysis guided project on the Maven site, which is actually a really, really fun one. I teach that one. You end up building a really cool Likert scale to analyze HR employee survey data. So that's one example of a project that is right there at your fingertips that I think would be pretty representative of the type of work that an HR analyst would do. But regardless of the specialty, do that research, figure out what those common projects are, and start from there.
So this one's from April, and from a hiring manager perspective, what are the questions that people often perform the worst at, and what approach framework would you recommend to answer these really well? So I don't know if there's one question that folks would maybe perform the worst at, but I'll throw out a handful of like absolute red flags, sort of deal breakers from somebody sitting on the other side of the table. So actually, maybe one that's kind of a hard question to answer for some. So that first one I'll say is when somebody asks you, hey, why are you leaving your current job? That one is, it's really, we're trying to figure out a little bit of like you as a person. Are you leaving because you had a hard time getting along with people? Are you leaving because you thought the work was too hard? Are you leaving because you're like, those would be bad reasons, right? So like, definitely do not say my boss was a jerk, because your boss might be a jerk, but you have to come up with another reason, because if you tell me your boss is a jerk, I have no way of knowing if your boss is actually a jerk or if you're just sort of a difficult person to work with, right? So any kind of interpersonal answer there, I would avoid, and I would think of something else. It's probably the number one biggest red flag. The other things that that I've seen, like when we talk about in case studies, when somebody just sort of clams up and doesn't really talk, and they just like, oh, I don't know, and they just sort of stop, like that's a bad answer on a case study. It's totally okay to not get to the answer. It's totally okay to struggle and stumble. But when somebody just like goes quiet, or they just sort of give up, and they're not asking questions, they're not sort of probing, they're not letting you into their head, it's really hard on the interviewer side. You sort of just doubt that this is going to be somebody that will work well with problem solving. So I think that's a good one. And the other one we talked about was bluffing with any kind of a technical skill, especially if it's one that we can verify within a couple of minutes. If you get caught there, you're definitely going to be tossed out pretty quickly. So I'd say those are my big red flags. I don't know, Chris, do you have any others that you would say folks should really avoid?
I mean, one of the notorious questions is what's your biggest weakness question, and I've seen some pretty bad answers to that. And when I say bad, typically it's people just using the cop-out response, right? Like, I'm a perfectionist. I care too much about my work. Like, like that.
The Michael Scott.
Yeah, that doesn't give us anything interesting. And I think what we want to see from that question is self-awareness and the ability to proactively identify and correct your skills gaps or your deficiencies, right? So it's like, no one is expecting you to be perfect, and no one is expecting you to not have weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses. It takes a level of maturity to be able to identify and address them with honesty and with transparency. And it doesn't matter what it is, but as long as it's something that feels like a genuine weakness. You know what? I haven't had a ton of experience with building ETL pipelines, or I've never actually gotten a chance to use Python in previous roles, and I'm seeing that it's in demand, and it's something I'd like to learn. Here's how I'd approach adding it to my skill set. That's a much better answer, because yes, you are acknowledging a weakness, but you're also kind of showing a strength in a subtle way, because you're communicating how you would end up addressing and solving that weakness. So that's my advice for answering that question personally.
Awesome.
Here's a good one from the pre-submitted list. So, does a career gap of 4+ years prevent recruiters from considering my resume? The career gap conversation is a big one, and it comes up a lot. I'm curious to hear other people's perspectives on this too. My short answer is that hopefully recruiters won't rule you out because a career gap exists, period. I feel like that would be extremely short-sighted of an employer or recruiter to not even consider you for that reason. From your perspective, what I would suggest is be prepared to speak to it. Acknowledge that it's a potential red flag, or at the very least, something that is going to catch a recruiter's eye and that they'll likely ask about. So be prepared to have an explanation for that career gap. Speaking from my own personal experience, most of the time I don't see any problem at all with a career gap, even if that gap was you wanted to just travel the world for a few years. I think that's fantastic. Like, it tells me a little bit about who you are as a person. It feels like a genuine thing. Like, maybe you wanted to spend time taking care of family or kids. And like, if anyone penalizes you for that, then shame on them, right? Like, that's ridiculous. If the career gap is because, you keep getting fired from jobs, or you like can't land a stable job, or something that kind of very clearly speaks to your character or qualities, like, then I might be a bit more cautious of that being a glaring red flag on the resume. But in 99% of the cases that we're talking about here, a career gap in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just be prepared to talk about it. I don't know, John, anything you'd add on that one, or anyone in the comments?
No, I think you nailed what I would say is like, my concern as a hiring manager is that you're either something is wrong with you that is making you unhireable. Like, so when you come in for an interview, people are like, wow, this person's a jerk, or like they're super dumb or something, right? That is that's a concern, and I'm being really blunt, and people don't like hearing that if you've got a job gap, but that is a concern. And then the other one is just that, like, maybe you've been on the couch for 3 years doing nothing. Like, that's my other concern, is you just don't have the motor. So I think just the biggest thing is just know the story that you want to tell. It will, like Chris said, it will be asked about it. There are some completely acceptable and fine and, fun and noble, like there's so many flavors of good answers to that. The worst ones would just be, like, I don't know. I didn't feel like working for 3 years. It's like, yikes, that you're not getting in the next job. Let me tell you. So yeah. I've got one here that I think will be a good one too. So when it's your turn to ask questions during an interview, what are the good questions to ask? This one's from Dana, and this one it feels so open ended, so people don't necessarily know. So I think I'll tell you what not to do, and then what you should do. So don't do anything that you think you could answer with like 20 minutes of searching on the internet. That sort of shows you're not really prepared. I literally had a guy come in for a data scientist position. This was also at Vistaprint. And I was interviewing him, and he asked me what we sold at the company. And I said, what are we doing here? Like, why did I waste an hour of my time talking to a person who doesn't know what this company sells? And how did he even make it through life without knowing what the company sold? It was a pretty big company locally. So do not do that. Don't be that guy. He was not hired. And then in terms of good questions, I think things that have shown that you've thought about the role and the types of work that you would be doing, and like you're kind of looking for the next level of detail in the like building on the job description, building on some of the conversations that you've had, like, hey, I heard you guys talking about these initiatives. Have you ever tried doing this? Like, this is some of my experience. Like, show ways to kind of show how your experience might be relevant, and showing that you're thinking really thoughtfully about this. I think that's what I'm really interested in, seeing people like that. They genuinely care. They're not asking those, like, the research questions. They're being really thoughtful about the role. They're invested in it. That's what I would say. Chris, any other suggestions on that one?
No, I think you're spot on. Nothing to add.
Cool.
Here's a good one. Where did it go? From Nicolette, about the case study. So what if you were doing a case study in your interview, and you can come up with a framework to solve the problem, but you really don't know the right numbers to put in? So I assume this is likely in relation to like a market sizing case or something like that. The good news is, in my opinion, having a framework in mind is the most important thing. If you can establish and communicate the framework very well, I'm less worried about the precision of the numbers, to be honest, because in reality, you're not going to be asked to come up with these numbers on the spot. You'll have resources, but your ability to think strategically and break down the problem and apply a framework tells me much more about your ability as an analyst. So that said, like, I think you can be honest about it and say, like, this is the framework that I would use. I'm not really familiar with this space, but just for example, let's use, this round number, and just work through it with, even if they're placeholder values. I think, again, the process of creating and working through a framework in itself is still super valuable, and it's going to give you points with the interviewer, even if you don't know a good estimate for, the population of France, for instance.
Yeah,
so
100%. It's the framework. It's not the numbers. Yeah, that's awesome. This one's a super easy one, in my opinion. Joy Johnson, is it okay to add volunteer jobs as experience? Absolutely. I think absolutely. The key thing is to show experience that's relevant to you having the skill set and being able to do the job. If that was a volunteer job that you were passionate about, you didn't get paid for, I don't care about that. What I care about is, you had some responsibilities that line up, you have some skills that line up, and it's kind of cool to see people's passion zones too come through a little bit. So absolutely, if it's like totally, even if in the volunteer case, like I normally would say if it's totally irrelevant, like either figure out a way to make it somewhat relevant to the role or exclude it. But in the in volunteering, it's kind of just, it's often fun to see somebody talk about like, hey, this is a thing I'm so passionate about that I do this for free. It just shows passion. It shows about caring for something. And so I think you're never going to hurt yourself by including that. So
here's an interesting example interview question. So given the data we currently have, what additional types of data should we consider collecting? This is a really good question, and it kind of depends on the context and what you have access to as part of the interview. But I like this question because it kind of forces someone to showcase a lot of different types of thinking, right? Like, what interesting questions could you answer that you can't currently answer with the data you have? And what data would you need in what format or structure to be able to help you answer those questions? So to give you an example, you might say, okay, this is interesting. We've got transactional data, by day. That's cool. But I wonder if there are day part trends or different patterns that we might see by time of day. For that reason, I would love to capture data at a more granular level, like at the minute or hour level, so that we could see how these transactions trend over the course of the day. And maybe there are insights that we can derive based on sales in the morning versus evening, et cetera. So that's one example that kind of forces you to put on your analyst hat and think about not only the questions that would be interesting to answer, but the data that you would need in order to answer them. So I think that's a really cool question. I love that.
Yeah, that's like so directly related to what you would actually do on the job. So it's a really, really smart question for interviewers to ask. I've got one here from Humema. If you're not good at making charts appear visually appealing, does that make you a bad analyst? No way. We have two people here that are on probably opposite ends of the spectrum. Chris is known for beautiful data visualization. I'm known for the opposite of that. At this point in my career, I don't think it really hurts me that much. What I'm focusing on not making it beautiful, but making it trimmed down and very clear, the message that I'm trying to tell. So I don't spend a ton of time on packaging. When I was earlier in my career and I was primarily, making dashboards, and that was really the core of the job, it was more important to kind of spend time on formatting and making it beautiful. And Chris and I were working for Fortune 500 clients at the time too. And there was sort of the whole dog and pony show. So I think there's definitely some value, especially for folks, if you're trying to make a portfolio project, like there really is some value in making it aesthetically pleasing and stand out, even if it doesn't add to making it more clear in terms of the communication of the insights and the recommendations. Just making it beautiful actually matters. Like, I think if you guys have looked at any of our data playground challenges, you've definitely seen some that you're like, wow, this person is like a graphic designer on top of being an analyst. And it really is eye-catching. It makes you stop and look at it. So in terms of, there's really I would invest in it if I were you, if I were somebody like kind of trying to break in or early career, I would invest the time. And it's, I'm not personally investing the time right now. So I'm like not taking my own recommendation, but I would recommend that for anybody kind of early in career trying to break in.
Yeah. And just chiming in there, I had my eye on that question too. I agree with John that like the inability to make beautiful charts and graphs does not make you a bad analyst, period. Everyone's got their own strengths and weaknesses. There are analysts who are amazing at data engineering and data prep and exploratory analysis, and they just don't have the design aesthetic to make a beautiful polished chart, and that's okay. What I will say is, remember, if you are packaging up a project portfolio and that's one of the first things someone's seeing without context, remember that is going to be the first impression that some people get of you and your work. So play to your strengths, right? And if visualization is not your strong suit, I might be a little bit cautious sharing a link with visuals all over the page. And also just tailor it to the job, right? If it's a job that requires the development of BI reports and dashboards, then you might need to do a little bit of soul searching and say, hey, like data visualization and storytelling is a big critical component of that job. That's a skill that I should probably develop, right? But does it make you a bad analyst? Absolutely not.
I've got one here, Chris.
Yeah, you take it.
Awesome. So this one's from Georgie again. When it comes to an interview and you're asked some question using abbreviations that you've never heard of before, like what would you do in that situation? And have no idea how to respond. So I would just definitely just own that and ask for clarification. I would start with, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with that abbreviation. Can you explain a little? Can you give me what that is? That's not something that I would think would hurt anybody. And then what you can always do too is, like, let's say you weren't familiar with the abbreviation, they say it to you, then it jogs your memory. You can go, oh yeah, you could even say like, oh, I misheard you, if you want to, sound like you really knew what they were talking about the whole time. But yeah, I would own it. Don't try to just pretend like you're on the same page and you're not. Like, you're going to need to stop, probe a little bit, ask them to explain the concepts that you don't understand. And that really shouldn't hurt you. Like, no one cares about knowing abbreviations or anything like that. That's very, that's not a big part of the job. So.
And if you have a really devious interviewer, they might be trying to trip you up and saying, hey, what can you tell me about TBML? And it's just a made up acronym. So that comes back to the whole don't bluff thing, or you might get caught. Here's a question from Sahar. What is the smart answer to the question about reasons of transition to data career? I mean, for one, be honest. Like, there's got to be some reason, some driving force that's getting you excited about shifting into data analytics. Talk about that. I think if you're brand new to the field, the more you can talk about what gets you fired up about working in this field, why you're passionate about data, like, that's music to my ears, as someone who's worked in this space for many years. Talk about how data is the new oil and how, like, data literacy is this critical competency now, and you're really excited to stay on the leading edge and use data to make smart decisions. And like, talk about that. Like, talk about why you're really excited about getting into the role. And if you want to address, maybe what you liked and didn't like about previous roles and how this kind of feels like a great natural transition for you, that can be helpful as well.
Awesome. I've got another one here from Elke, who's been on last time too, and on a few of these. So awesome. So I've heard the term of back end and front end BI analyst. Can I categorize understanding business objectives, collecting data, data profiling, data transformation, and data modeling as back end, and then just data viz as front end? I'd say there's maybe like a little bit more nuance than that. And it's not, definitions will vary probably at different places. But in general, like, I can contrast two different roles at two different companies where I've seen analytics groups. So the first is where Chris and I worked together about 15 years ago, Digitas, where we were in the analytics department, and we had clients. And again, like I talked about before, major Fortune 500 clients. And so there was a kind of like a front end component of that, which was, yes, the data visualization and the storytelling, but also a lot of communication and understanding the customer and interfacing with them and giving them recommendations and trying to push them to take action. So, like, I would say, yes, data viz, but also all of that sort of a little more on the business side, a little more on the communicating, a little more on the insights and recommendations. And then when I went to, and so folks there, they skewed kind of like Chris, like we've got the technical skills, but we also can talk to the clients. And then at Vistaprint, that was the analytics department was all internal, and it was dealing with these massive data sets, and it was an extremely technical job. And the job we were like, how do we handle all of this data and how do we make sense of it? And sometimes there are literally technical limitations on processing it and things like that. So it was a super technical, and that was really a different breed of analyst that they skewed super technical. They had to be really good with SQL and other data pipelining things. And they didn't have to do a lot of talking to clients. They would have like an internal stakeholder, but the level of polish wasn't really there. So that's probably a good contrast when people talk about like a back room or a back end analyst. It skews more technical, more prepping the data, also analyzing some, but still, even for that type of role, probably still doing data viz and coming up with stuff, but a little bit less on the business and the communication side. So hope that helps.
Seen a couple of questions come through along these lines. So question from Jim here with regards to the why did you leave your last job? How would you handle that if you've been downsized, terminated, not due to poor performance? Really good question. There were some others about, how to talk about being laid off from a previous role, but still trying to come across as a great candidate. It's a tricky one. I would say if you were downsized or terminated, join the club with, the several 100,000 people this year who were in the same boat. And in a case like that, it really doesn't reflect poorly on you as an individual or your skill set. And hopefully an employer will be able to recognize that. One thing you might be able to do is, for one, address it, be honest about it, be upfront. And two, kind of talk about like what you learned from that experience in that role. And, maybe why this might be a silver lining or an opportunity in disguise, because you learned a lot about what you enjoy doing, what you don't enjoy doing, and this new opportunity that you're applying for feels like a great next step in your career. So maybe kind of pivot it away from the layoff and more into how you're taking what you've learned and applying it into this new opportunity. Anything, I'm curious, anyone in the chat or John, if you have any thoughts on how you might answer a question like that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the more you can kind of just explain that the business was in a lot of trouble, and the more that's the story, I think is, to me, that's probably the best thing that you can do to kind of soften how much that's hurting you. Like if it's like, hey, this business was just in trouble and they were laying off a lot of people. Like I've been through that at like 5 different businesses. We let go great people. So, like any hiring manager has probably been through that too. And I think that's kind of the main thing that I would say is focus on that. Yeah. This is a good one just an interesting one. I'll give my take, and I'm curious what Laramie says. So how can you ask for feedback after an interview? Is it a good idea or not? I've gotten feedback once after an interview, like specific feedback, and it was really interesting. It was also Vistaprint. Vistaprint keeps coming up, and Vistaprint had like a really buttoned up recruiting process. The guy who was the recruiter there ended up being the head recruiter at Chewy, the pet brand company. And he is just one of the most awesome recruiters I've gotten to work with. And he gave me feedback after, and he was like, hey, yeah, here's some things that they loved about you. Here's some things that they didn't love about you, which that was like kind of interesting to hear specific things that people that I was going to be working with didn't love about me. And he even told me who said it, so like that was surprising. I've never had that experience anywhere else. It made me feel like they were like pretty buttoned up and had this thing into a process. I sort of think in general that you're probably not going to get a lot of feedback, especially if they're passing on you, other than like a very generic, we didn't think you were a good fit for the role. I think employers largely like just don't really want to open themselves up to any kind of liability for like too much specifics around why they didn't hire you. So I think generally the best feedback you're going to get is like, oh, you're not a good fit for the role. We think we found somebody else who's a better fit. I'd be surprised if they gave you like the feedback I think you're looking for, Laramie, which is like, you were missing this specific thing and we wish you were better here, or like we didn't like your personality. But I don't know, Chris, what do you think? Have you had any similar experiences or?
Not really. I think my take is like, it can't hurt to ask. I would probably wait until, you didn't get the job and that book is closed, it wouldn't, I don't think it would be a good look to interview and then the minute you get home be like, hey, how'd I do? Because that's just asking the interviewer, the employer, to do extra work, which may not be a good look. But if you didn't get the opportunity and you felt like you put your best foot forward, it couldn't hurt to ask. I think, to John's point, you may just get kind of generic cookie cutter responses, but who knows? You might get a recruiter who's got some insight to share with you that could help you do better next time. So I could go either way on it, to be honest. All right, let's see. Here's one from pre-submitted. I have an academic teaching background, looking to get into data analytics, post completion of my PhD. What are the skills I need to develop apart from Excel and Power BI, and showcase it in my resume? So first off, I think teachers make fantastic data analysts. We've seen it time and time again. There's something special about being a teacher, being able to communicate complex topics in a really clear and intuitive and approachable way. That foundational skill will carry really nicely into a data analytics career. So I fully support the path. I just want to say that first. In terms of tools, I generally talk about learning skills before focusing on tools. So think about where are your skill gaps and less about which tool you're going to use to apply those skills. So try to become well-rounded in each stage of the analytics workflow that we teach at Maven, right? It's data prep and QA, it's exploratory analysis, it's visualization and storytelling, and it's database, design and modeling. And I think if you've got a pretty good, well-rounded skill set in that regard, when we look for, common tool stacks for people looking to break into analytics, Excel, Power BI, SQL, that's a really, really solid stack. So that would be the only thing I might recommend just dipping your toe in is SQL, just because of its versatility and its prevalence in job roles, even entry level. If you do that, everyone uses Excel. It's an amazing tool for quick ad hoc and analytics. Power BI is best in class for business intelligence and data modeling and visualization. And SQL is obviously the gold standard for database analytics. And if you've got enough experience to kind of be able to speak intelligently about those three tools, you should be a great candidate for most entry-level analytics positions.
Nailed it. Yeah. I've got one here from Caroline. So in an interview, what are ways you can determine what are the main responsibilities of the job? I've got some job descriptions and they can be really wide ranging. Yeah. So I think Caroline's talking about how you read a job description and it talks about every tool under the sun. And it talks about this super wide range of stuff that you might do. And generally, the reality is they may literally list 10 tools that you should be proficient in. You're probably going to use 2 for 95% of your work on the job. And one of those is probably going to be 80% of your work. So it's basically, I think that the thing is to just ask and, get some clarification. And I think that's something you don't need to wait until the in-person or the live interview. Those are probing questions you can ask when you're talking with a kind of the screening person, somebody in HR, or having any kind of initial written conversations. Just, hey, I saw all these things. I'm curious, are there any of these tools that you guys lean on more heavily? You could ask them, out of all these things that were listed, what do you think are the most 1 or 2 most important for the role? But yeah, I think just ask, be straight up and ask about that. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's, I don't know, showing you that you're direct and trying to get to the bottom of the role is actually a very good thing, in my opinion.
Okay, here's a fun one. How do you reply to the question, tell me about yourself? Can you tell a bad and a good reply to this one? So that's one of the questions, just for the record, that it can be the toughest to answer, and that personally I get caught up on because it's so vague and so open-ended. It's usually the first thing someone's going to ask, when you're not really warmed up. So it can be a tricky one. I would say a bad answer to the question, tell me about yourself, would be something like, I'm Chris Dutton. I have 2 cats. I live in Concord. I love baseball. And I'm really good at escape rooms and puzzles. That's a bad answer, right? Because it hasn't given you any information about my analytical abilities or how I would be successful in the role. So I think it kind of goes without saying that you should be painting a picture of the person that you would be in this role and why you are a great fit for it. So a better answer might be something like, hey, I studied quantitative economics in college. I took an econometrics course that helped me fall in love with data analytics, used that to get my first job at a marketing firm in Boston, and got a chance to apply what I was learning to build some amazing reports and analyses for Fortune 500 customers. I had an opportunity to teach analytics skills to fellow analysts at the company, blah, blah, blah. But like, you can start to see how I've got a background that aligns with the role. I'm pursuing opportunities in a logical way. I live and breathe analytics. That's a much better answer, right? If you don't have that really direct, tangible, relevant experience to draw from, then it's talking about how you pursued a passion project and found data to analyze, and how you think the process of exposing insights and patterns through raw data is fascinating and really impactful. Like, just, think about what's going to position yourself as someone who's going to be a great fit for this role, and try to rehearse an answer and draft an answer. That would be my other feedback there, is even for these kind of simple questions, non-technical questions, having a story prepared and drafted so that it's tight, it's rehearsed, you're not rambling.
Mm-hmm.
That really helps for those questions like this as well.
Yeah, definitely have that one prepped. Here's another one that's kind of similar to that, like that you should probably have something prepped. Why should we hire you? Basically, what are your suggestions if you don't have the experience and you're not feeling confident in justifying it? So this is one you might get asked, but in general, there's sort of an implicit ask the entire interview, right? Like whether they're directly coming out and asking it, or you're making the case throughout all of the other questions. This is the question they're asking themselves, So like if you do not have a good answer to this, why would I hire you, right? I'm not going to. So you definitely need a good answer to that. And really, think about what I want when I'm trying to hire a data analyst. It's somebody that can do the job, has at least sort of some of the skills, has a really good mind, is a good communicator, good business acumen, and I think would be a fun person to add to the team and like build the team's culture, right? So those are really the questions I'm gunning for to sort of simplify it. And you're trying to show that throughout the entire interview. And in the specific question, if it's asked directly, I would talk about the skills that you do have, how you can apply them to the role, explain your understanding of the role and the projects that they would need you to work on. But basically that's the pitch you're making, is you have the skills to do the job. You're a fun person to work with. You're a great problem solver. You've got a great mind and good business acumen. And that's what, but definitely don't tell them you don't know. This is your shot. Yeah.
All right. I got a quick one from pre-submitted. What optimization do I need to do on my LinkedIn profile? Check out the recording of Aaron's session. I was that 2 weeks ago, John, I think, or maybe last week. It's
up on YouTube. Let me see if and you guys, some of you have already been there, but I'll grab the link to YouTube right now.
Yeah,
we've actually got all this stuff on YouTube now.
Yeah, definitely check that out. Some really good practical tips that you can apply right away. Here's another one from chat. So how to effectively demonstrate your motivation in an interview. I think there are a few ways to do it. When I see someone who's applying for a role and they have a lot of evidence of self-paced learning or or development or career or personal development, that is a really good indicator of motivation for me. The fact that you are proactively taking courses or boot camps or degree programs, whatever it might be, to better yourself, to build your knowledge, like that's amazing to see. I love that. Other things like John mentioned, pursuing volunteer opportunities is a really cool thing to show that you're a motivated individual, and that you go above and beyond. And then again, like, I'm a broken record, but projects is another great way. And if I see that you're the kind of person who is spending your like personal time, your nights and weekends outside of work, learning data analytics and doing projects that you're excited about and participating in Maven challenges, like, those are all amazing ways to A, showcase your motivation, and B, build a really impressive portfolio that's going to be a great asset for you as well. So a couple ideas that I think could go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just anything that shows that you're a self-starter and that you've proactively, you've decided to go after something that somebody else didn't tell you to do. Those are good anecdotes. Yeah. Awesome. Let's see what else we've got here.
Just realized we were technically over time, and I didn't even realize it because we're cranking through.
Yeah, this is pretty fun. Awesome. I like these a lot.
I'll maybe do a couple more.
Yeah, I'll do a quick one. This one's from Dalel. Should we send a cover letter with the resume to explain the gap? So here's the thing. I would just say no. I wouldn't lean into it that hard in the cover letter. I think there's two things that happen. If you've got that gap on your resume, they're generally not going to read the cover letter first. If they see it and they sort of rule you out because they're afraid of it, they will not read the cover letter. If they don't, and then they go to the cover letter and you make a bigger deal out of it than it is, personally, I don't know, unless it's like a very succinct, very clear story, and you could do it as like an aside that's not the main focus of the cover letter, then maybe that's fine. But I think in general, I would wait for them to ask in person if they even ask, because I just think you're going to get tossed out before the cover letter, or you're going to get through because they didn't care about it. So that would be my, don't draw a ton of attention to it and make them think it's a bigger deal than it is.
It looks like we've addressed most of the themes, at least in the pre-submitted ones.
Yeah, and most of the ones in the ones here in session too.
Awesome questions. This is a lot of fun, and glad everyone's able to join us for this one.
Thank you all for joining us for these past 4 weeks, especially those of you who've been to all of them. But for anybody who's shown up to anything, we appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun for me and Chris and Aaron and Enrique. We have just today, I think initially we were going to do the free courses until yesterday, the end of the month. We just made the decision to give you guys a little bit more time. So if anybody is like, oh, I wish I could finish thinking like an analyst or launching your data career, I think we said we'll continue to leave those open for free for everyone until Monday. So do that. The ChatGPT for data analytics course is also free, but that one's always free. So put that at the lower priority. Don't scramble for that one. You could still take that one past Monday. So just thanks everybody for making these so fun. We hope you found it valuable, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.